Hello and welcome to today's BigMarker demo. My name is Hannah and I'm the Director of Customer Success here at BigMarker. And what you're seeing on the screen now is an example of a channel on BigMarker. And what your channel is on BigMarker is going to be the place where all of your content is stored. It's essentially really just like a company or organization account for your webinar hosting activities. So as you can see here on this example channel, this is the channel where I host all of my public demos each week. And as you can see, all of my upcoming sessions are listed out, as well as all of my recordings. So again, it's kind of a storage space for all of your content. And as you can see here, I'm hosting the same webinar over and over again, but you can actually use your imagination to kind of fill this space with your own content. Now, an important aspect of the channel is the concept of channel hosts. Now, a channel host on BigMarker is somebody who can actually set up and create webinars on the channel. So this is kind of reserved for people on your team who would be managing the webinar hosting kind of process on your account. So your account does come with 2 free host licenses included with your subscription. And if you need to add more, they're $19 US per month per host additionally. And those can be managed and set up in the Manage Co-host button here below on your channel. So a kind of secondary option for the channel is to kind of open it up to people outside of your organization. You can actually build attendees or registrants as subscribers, and then you can use the discussion board and calendar features to communicate with them between webinars. Now, this is a completely optional kind of aspect of the channel, but if you do want to continue that conversation between webinars, you can use the discussion board and calendar to connect with people who are subscribed to your channel. Now again, the channel is kind of your company account. So what I like to describe it as this kind of macro view of your BigMarker experience. On the more micro level, you have your individual webinars. And to set up a webinar, regardless of the type of webinar you're planning to host, just click the green schedule button that can be found in the top right-hand corner of pretty much any screen that you're on BigMarker. And when you click that schedule button, a kind of pop-up, a page is going to pop up asking you, okay, what kind of webinar do you want to create? And as you can see, we have several different kinds that you can create on BigMarker, so it's kind of important to know, what's what. So first and foremost, we have the live webinar feature, which is just your standard kind of scheduled webinar. Everything is manually triggered in a live environment, just as you would expect with any other kind of live webinar hosting experience. The next one is an on-demand webinar, and an on-demand webinar is a pre-recorded video, so an MP4 video that you are uploading to a landing page on BigMarker. Now, when you send people to this page, people know that they're watching a recording. They can press play. It's an on-demand environment, so they can watch it whenever they like. But there's a lot more customization that can be done than just sending somebody to like a YouTube video. With BigMarker's on-demand webinar environment, you can customize the landing page. You can actually collect registrations to your on-demand webinar, and if you so choose, you can also sell tickets. So if you want to monetize those on-demand webinars, you can do that as well. And of course, you can sell tickets with all other webinars, but just letting you know, it's also a possibility with on-demand. So the next two, automated and evergreen, are very similar in how they're set up. The only difference is how they're scheduled. So with an automated webinar on BigMarker, again, the way that it's actually set up is going to be a kind of like a live webinar environment, but you're pre-programming all the content that you would traditionally host in real time manually or live. And with automated, you're just pre-scheduling it beforehand so that you don't even have to be in the webinar room, although you can be if you so choose. So again, this is very similar for automated and evergreen, the difference here being that it's scheduled differently. So automated, it's an actual time slot that you're filling, so Monday at 2 p.m. And you can of course schedule more sessions, but they would all be scheduled manually on a recurring basis. Whereas with evergreen, how you're scheduling it is more like, okay, daily or hourly or monthly, so it's going to be on a continuous cycle until you decide to essentially stop it. And then the final kind of piece is the 24/7 webinar. And a 24/7 webinar is an always open webinar room that you have the same link each time. So you can just share that link out. It's great for meetings great for just kind of like more casual drop-in sessions. And it has all of the functionality of a live webinar, except you cannot record. So again, excellent choice for meetings and quick pop-in sessions, but not so great for like a true webinar environment. For a true webinar environment, you're going to want to go with either the live or the automated or evergreen environment. And then as you can see, our sixth option is not quite yet available. It's a webinar series functionality. So currently, if you want to offer a webinar series, you can just schedule out individual sessions. But in the future, you'll be able to actually create them all in one bulk session. So once you actually choose the webinar of your liking, you just click create, and from there you fill out some really basic details about that webinar. So give it a title, maybe a description, figure out the date and time that you want to offer it. And once you create that webinar, you're actually going to generate a landing page. And I've already gone ahead and created just an example webinar landing page to check out. And as you can see here, you know, I'm offering this webinar, and this is where people can come to register. Now, this page is also where people will come to attend the webinar when it's live. This button here that says register will just change to an enter webinar button when it's live. And if you choose to publish the recorded version of your webinar, people will also be able to access it from this section as well. So this page will kind of be the home base for this specific webinar, and the link will never change. It will always be accessible from this page, regardless of where it's at in its life cycle. And obviously, this is a highly customizable page. Now, as you can see, I've added some images, I've added an about section and agenda topics, and you know, the logo up top here. But there's a lot that you can do more than just, you know, what we've covered so far. So to really get into the editing tools that you have at your fingertips, let's kind of refer to this top right-hand corner where we have these series of 3 buttons. The first being the Edit Page button, which if I click this, it's going to allow me to do some live editing on this landing page. So for example, if I want to edit my image, edit this large banner image here at the top, or perhaps I want to edit the logo or the button color, maybe I want to make it this nice magenta pink. And I can also go in and edit the About section and agenda topics. But for the most part, this Edit Page button is kind of some fairly limited or brief editing tools that you have. For more robust editing, you're actually going to want to draw your attention to these kind of 2 secondary buttons. The first being Change Template. Now, with BigMarker, you're not limited to one landing page template. You actually have quite a few templates that you have access to, so that you can go in and actually say, okay, maybe I want to preview how this landing page will look. And you'll see how very different the layout and images and everything will look when you actually visit this page. So for example, I have this Tableau template here, and as you can see, there's an image on the right instead of a large kind of centered banner image. Register button is on the left, and the About section is in a gray kind of block here, followed by the presenter information below that. So again, a very different kind of look and feel and aesthetic than the previous template. And that just kind of brings us to our third and final kind of aspect, which is the Manage Webinar button. So the Manage Webinar button actually takes you to the back end of your webinar. And what I want to clarify is that this will look very familiar to you as a host, even more so than the landing page. The landing page is really what your attendees will see. But as a host, you know, this will kind of be your home base. And what we do is we break down the back end of your webinar into 6 parts. The first being the Edit tab, and the Edit tab is where all of the true kind of webinar details can be modified and set up. So you'll notice that it's broken down on the left-hand panel here into these kind of sections. So webinar details is first. That's where you can modify your title, the date and time of your webinar, all of that kind of standard stuff. But what I really want to draw your attention to today is the following couple features. So the first being presenters. Now, what we covered in the channel is the hosts, so the host licenses, but the presenters section is a little bit different. So hosts can set up webinars. Presenters, you can invite as many as you like to your webinar. There's no additional cost or fee. And to add guest presenters, all you have to do is click this blue Add New Presenter button. And what pops up is just, some basic information about that presenter. So their name, title, maybe even a bio. But what's really important here is filling out the contact field, because you're going to enter that person's email address, and then from there it's going to actually send them an invitation to be a host of this webinar. And when they receive that, it's also going to contain a personalized login link. So all they have to do from that email is click that link, and it auto logs them into their quote unquote account, and it logs them into the webinar with those presenter roles. So you don't have to worry about assigning them to be a presenter when they get into the webinar. They will already have that ability when they enter into the webinar. And then also you can manage what permissions this presenter has during the webinar. So can they manage the webinar page? So what we're actually going through now, do you want to give them that kind of host role and have them be able to make edits to this webinar? That's off by default, but you'll notice that the following 3 are on by default. So you'll want to actually make sure that all of these look good before saving your changes as well. The next option is, can they have admin control within the live webinar? Meaning, will they get that host control panel? We'll cover this a little bit later on when we enter into the live webinar, but it's important to note that you can also allow guest presenters to have full admin access in the webinar. Then the following ones are, do you want the presenter to be displayed as a featured presenter on the landing page, or do you just want them behind the scenes? And also, do you want them, attendees or visitors of this landing page to be able to contact that person? If the answer is no, you can also remove their contact information from the landing page. So once you have your presenter set up, you just click Save Changes, and you're good to go. Now, following this, the only other 2 things that I want to cover are the selling tickets aspects and the privacy aspects of your webinar. So the first is sell tickets. If you would like to sell tickets to your BigMarker webinar, you certainly can. BigMarker processes the payments on our end. We are not using a third-party tool, so you can do everything from BigMarker's end, and you can also retrieve your funds from BigMarker as well, which I'll talk about in just a second. So with the sell tickets aspect, all you have to do is select paid tickets or even a donation, and set your price to attend the live and also view the recording in case any stragglers who did not purchase a ticket for the live event would also like to purchase a recorded version of your webinar. So once you set that up, then on your landing page, when people register for your webinar, they will be prompted to enter a credit card to purchase that ticket. Now, what I was mentioning about retrieving those funds, if you go back to your channel in the settings tab, there's a treasury that you can set up, and you can actually send those funds to your PayPal account post-webinar so that you can actually collect the funds after the webinar has been hosted. Now, the final piece of the puzzle here is the privacy section. Now, you'll notice that I've selected this to be a private webinar, but you can certainly also select it to be public. Now, the difference here being that a public webinar on BigMarker is searchable on BigMarker and also on search engines like Google, Bing, etc. Whereas private webinars are not listed publicly on BigMarker. They're also not searchable on the web. You'd either have to have the link, which is the kind of default privacy setting, or you can choose one of the other advanced privacy settings to offer. Now, these privacy settings are for your live webinar. If you choose to record your webinar on BigMarker, you can also decide the recording permissions as well. So if you want everyone to be able to view it, so anyone with a link, or if you want to limit it to, for example, anyone who attended the webinar or registered for the webinar, etc. Also, by default, we have register to view recording turned on. This means that if everyone is selected here, people who did not register for your live webinar would still be required to register in order to view that recording. So you can still gather registrants after the webinar has been hosted. But of course, you can turn that off as well if you don't want it on. So that's all I really want to cover for the edit section. I want to draw your attention now to the design section, which is the next tab. And the good thing about the design section is it's super brief. It's essentially just a continuation of the change template button we saw earlier. So you can also change your template from this section as well. Now below this, I do want to draw your attention next to the logo, the branding of your live webinar. So instead of having the BigMarker B in the top left-hand corner of your live webinar screen, you can actually change this logo to be your own. So if you want to add your own logo or your own branding, or just a theme color, you can also add that as well. As you can see here, we have some stock colors available, or you can add your hex code here by clicking this plus sign and adding that code. Also, you can save this as default, so each webinar that you host will contain this kind of theme in your live webinar room. Now, the only other thing in this section is the webinar preview card. Now, the preview card, if you remember back to the channel, how all of those events had that kind of square image that was kind of showing that the preview for each of those webinars, you can actually add your own image here. So you can choose a default image that we have offered to you as a stock image, or you can upload your own and make your channel look really, really nice. So that's about it for the design section. I'm going to scroll back up to the top of the screen, and now we're going to get into more of the marketing and management tools that we offer on BigMarker. So the emails and invitation section is next, and I'm sure you can imagine, this is where you can set up and send really nice looking invitations and also reminders for your webinar. So if you choose to send invites from BigMarker, all you have to do is click the new invitation button here, and from there all you're doing is adding an email list, and then you can also include or modify rather the content and the design of that email. So you will absolutely be able to edit those emails to your liking, and you can send them out or schedule them to be sent at a later time. Now, in the reminders and notifications section, I do want to draw your attention to 3 really important emails, because regardless of if people are registering from an email or if you're just sharing the webinar link, everyone will receive a confirmation email letting them know that they've successfully registered for your webinar, as well as 2 reminder emails leading up to the webinar, meaning a 24-hour reminder before the webinar opens and also a 30-minute reminder before the webinar opens. Now, as you can see, you can edit all of these. You can even turn some off or add more by clicking the Add New Emails button here up top. But the important thing to note is very similarly to the presenters tab that we covered earlier. All of these emails will contain a personal login link, and why this is so important is because it makes it so easy to get into the webinar. It's just a personal link that's included with these emails that is sent to each attendee or each registrant, and they will be able to click on that link, and it's just a one-click entry into the webinar. So it's important to at least keep one of these emails on. If you don't want to keep these emails on, email support@bigmarker.com, and they will be able to extract that list or help you extract that list if you want to do it using your own email sender. So below this, you'll also see that you have all of your other notification emails that we have set up. So a recording publish notification, as well as a feedback survey. You can edit these, you can turn them off if you don't want them to be sent, or you can just leave them as is and they'll send out accordingly. Now, the final section here is the general emails section, and this is if you'd like to send any sort of like generic follow-up email. All you have to do is click Add New Email, and then you can choose if you want to send your email to people who are registered or people who you've invited or attended the webinar, and from there you can modify that content and send it out. So it's a great tool if you just want to use BigMarker for generic emails as well. So again, that's the emails and invitations tab. The next one that we're going to cover is Manage Webinar. And if you remember from when we first visited this section, this was kind of our home base. And the reason being is that this is where your dashboard is for your webinar. Whenever you visit your webinar as a host, you will always come to this Manage Webinar tab first. And the reason being is that you have all of your kind of quick links here up top in the dashboard to really cover everything. So the first 4 kind of buttons here at the top are really important. This first one, the shareable link to your webinar. So again, you will not want to share the link that comes through in your email, because that is a personal link. For the generic link to your webinar, all you have to do is just copy this quick link here, and you can share that wherever you like. So whether you want to share it on social media, in a blog post, in an email, wherever you want to share it, this will just send people to the landing page of your webinar. Now, you'll see that we have a trackable links section as well. So let's say you are doing some marketing for your webinar and you want to see what's the most effective. You can actually add trackable links, so a tracking code to your link. So let's say we want to do Facebook ad 1. So if I'm sharing a Facebook ad and I want to see the difference of how it performs to maybe Facebook ad 2, I can change these trackable links. I can add as many as I like. Once I have this looking, how I want it, I can copy it and I can share it on that specific or in that specific place. And then when I go to my Manage Webinar Registration section, I can actually extract that list so I can see which tracking codes perform the best for conversion. Now, beyond that, I also have my copy webinar button. So if you have a nice looking live webinar setup that you want to just duplicate so you don't have to do all the work all over again, you can duplicate it by clicking the copy webinar button and setting it up there. Now that will duplicate all of your settings, all of the content that you've loaded and everything like that. So it will just be a complete copy of your original webinar. The next button being practice webinar. This is going to be a button that will allow you to launch a practice session. It will include all of the kind of content that you've preloaded and everything like that. So it will be a simulated environment of the exact same webinar that you're planning to host in the future. And you can just share that link with people, anyone who you want to jump in and practice with you. And then the fourth button is you can also delete your webinar from this. So if you created a webinar by mistake and you just want to delete it, you can do that from here. Now, as you can see, we're on this dashboard and we have a lot of things going on in the left-hand panel, but I'm only really going to draw your attention to 3 more things on this section. The first being the analytics that we collect on BigMarker, because, as you can see here, we have this kind of pretty robust section where we have a lot of reporting going on, and you'll receive these reports automatically via email following your webinar. But if you ever want to check these out at any time, we collect analytics that go from the registration to the post-webinar analytics to the recording analytics as well. So what we collect on the registration side is obviously, if you're sending invitations from BigMarker, we'll track the open rate, the click rate, and of course the conversion rate on the email invitations that you send. And then we also have this organic registration section, which is going to cover, who, if you've just sent the link to the landing page, if they're registering just from the landing page link. So you'll see the difference here between emails and also just the landing page registrations. Now, on the post-webinar analytics, you're going to receive a lot of really, really useful stats as well. So after your webinar has been hosted, you'll see who actually attended versus who registered. So you'll get that show up rate. And then you'll see that we have these engagement stats, and you see attendance and engagement by minute. This is going to show like a little bell curve that shows, how long people were attending for versus how long they're engaged for. And on BigMarker, we measure engagement by actually how long somebody is on the tab of your webinar for. So you'll notice that we have it on a per attendee basis and on a total attendee basis. And it's broken down by duration and engagement. So duration, again, is going to be how long somebody is physically in the webinar for. And the engaged time is going to be, how long that person's on your webinar tab for. So if they're off, clicking on Facebook or checking their emails or something like that, and they're not physically on that tab of your webinar, even though they're still technically in the webinar room, that's going to eat away at their total engaged time. Also, we're going to collect all chats, Q&As, and polls submitted by each attendee, so you'll see a breakdown of those results as well in a transcript following your webinar as well. And again, as mentioned, all of these analytics will be emailed to you in a report following your webinar. But if you ever want to download them or check them out from here, you can check them out here, and you can also download these reports as Excel files, PDF, and also the chat transcript here that will also include polls and Q&A. So we've covered the dashboard. I mentioned that I wanted to cover 3 things here. So the following 2 are the widgets section and the preload section. So widgets on BigMarker allow you to host registration and even the live webinar on your own website. So we have 2 options for registration: single registration, or single webinar rather, registration widget, and then also a multi-webinar widget. So with the single registration or single webinar, you'll notice that you have this kind of widget here, preview on the right-hand side, and you have your editor here on the left. So the widget type, I can select image only or even form. And form is just going to display, first name, last name, email. People can register right from your website using these. And as you can see, you can also customize the image, background color, and also the button link color. So once you have your widget set up the way you want it to, you can just copy this code and embed it into your site. There's not much else to note there. It's pretty simple. And I noted that there was two other kind of versions. So the multi-webinar allows you to create multiple webinars, so a list of webinars that people can register for all of your upcoming webinars, or a handful of your upcoming webinars on your site. And then we also have the live webinar widget. So this is just going to be a piece of code. As you can see, it's just an iframe code that you can copy and embed into your site, and then people can actually watch the live webinar as it's happening on your own website. And the final section here that I want to cover is preload. So I always like to cover this section because I think it's a really good best practice for all webinar hosting that you do on BigMarker if you're hosting these live webinars, is that you can actually preload all of the content that you plan to share during your webinar so that you're not scrambling when the webinar room opens to load all of this content. So if you have any slideshows or videos or perhaps a pop-up offer or even handouts and polls, you can pre-populate that really, really simply just by, for example, if we go in the files and videos section, all you have to do is click upload a new file, which means like a slideshow. PDF files always work best. And also video, so MP4 or YouTube, and then you just load your content there and it's saved for you and ready and waiting for you when you enter your webinar. The same is true for all of the preloaded functionality that we have on BigMarker. Now, as I mentioned, preloading is for live webinars only. The next tab that we have here is the automation tab, and that's going to be reserved for any automated or evergreen webinars that you have on BigMarker. And as you can see here, what you'll have is if you want to enable automation, all you have to do is enable that by clicking on. And then we have this timeline of events, and by default, you have the webinar room open time, the start of the webinar, so the scheduled start time that you've scheduled your webinar for, as well as the end time. So if you want to add any content in between these kind of three steps, all you have to do is click the green new auto event button here to add an event to go into your timeline. So first and foremost, you have to select, okay, what type of content do you want to share? Perhaps we want to send a chat message. So when I click that, a drawer is going to slide out asking me, okay, when's the exact moment that you want to trigger this piece of content? Perhaps we want to send it, 5 minutes and 32 seconds before the start time of the webinar. Then you just give it a title. So when you're looking through your timeline, you can say, okay, this is the welcome message. I know that I've already loaded that. And then whatever content that you want to show to your audience. So if this is a message, you can say, okay, welcome, thanks for joining, etc. Once you save that, it's actually going to go into your timeline automatically, and you just can continue to add these new auto events to your timeline until you've filled it to your liking. Now, the final thing that I want to note is the end webinar. So in addition to being able to select when your automated webinar actually will end and close for good, you can also add an exit URL so that after that webinar ends and closes, it's going to actually redirect your audience to another URL. Now, if you don't add an exit URL, that's okay. We'll just send people to the landing page of your webinar. But of course, if you would like to send people elsewhere, perhaps to your own website or to interact with a deal or a survey or something like that, you can just enter that URL. And then when the webinar room closes, the attendees will be redirected accordingly. Now, the final thing I want to note in the automation tab is the audience permissions. So if you're not planning to be in your live webinar, or excuse me, your automated webinar, you can modify if your attendees will be able to see who else is attending. Typically, people turn that off because they don't want the attendees to see, the attendee list. But then also the public chat in the Q&A. Now, if you are not going to be in the webinar, I don't recommend having the public chat on. However, if you are planning to be in your automated webinar to moderate it and perhaps kind of interact with your other attendees, you can definitely keep it on. But if you're not, I don't recommend having the public chat on. But Q&A, that's actually going to be a place where people can submit questions. So if you want to limit one or the other, that's totally up to you. But that's where you would be able to modify those permissions. And then the final tab that we have here is the integrations tab. And this is where you're going to be able to set up all of the direct integrations that you would want to use to integrate with your other favorite tools that you're using. We typically integrate with a lot of mail, CRM, and like marketing tools. So HubSpot, Salesforce, MailChimp, all of the kind of big names in the space. But we also have a Zapier integration too. So that's a third-party product that will allow you to integrate with other tools on the web that we don't directly integrate with. So again, we've covered the channel, we've covered the webinar setup process. The third and final thing that I want to cover in today's demo is the live hosting experience. And I already have this example webinar set up, so I'm actually going to enter this, and I'm going to show you around both from a host's perspective and also from an attendee's perspective. So right now, I'm entering as a host of this webinar. And as you can see, I have this option to choose either telephone audio if I want to do like a more traditional dial-in, or I can use my computer audio, which is what I typically choose, where I can use a computer-based microphone and also or a microphone, or excuse me, a webcam as well. So once I select one of these, I can enter into the webinar. And from here, what you're seeing on the screen now is the blank state of the webinar room. And I want to clarify that this is not what your attendees see. This is only what you will see as a host of the webinar. So what your attendees will see, to populate this, I'm just going to open a preloaded slideshow that I have. And I'm going to zoom in a bit because the only two aspects of the webinar room that your audience will see is whatever's on the presentation screen here. So that could mean a slideshow, it could mean a video, so YouTube or MP4 videos, it could mean screen sharing, it could also mean your webcam sharing if you're sharing a webcam, or any combination of those. All of that content will appear on the screen here on the left-hand side. Your audience will also have access to this chat panel here, and depending on the settings that you've chosen, will be able to interact with the public chat, the Q&A, polls, and handouts that you choose to share during your webinar. Now, what your attendees will not see during your webinar, but what you have access to as a host, is the sharing toolbar here at the top right-hand corner of the screen. Now, this is where you can share a microphone, a webcam, screen sharing, so that's what I'm sharing right now, where you can see my browser and my mouse movement in real time. And then all of that content that I was able to preload, so any slideshows, any video content, and also any offer pop-ups that I wanted to share. All of that is ready and waiting for me in queue. All I have to do is click on one of these buttons to open the file, and then I just click open on the file that I want to share, and it will just go right into my presentation screen. Now, the final aspect of the hosting experience is this host control panel, and as you can see here on the audience tab, I have certain functionality or tools that are auto-enabled and certain ones that are auto-disabled. The first four are auto-enabled, and this will allow for the chat box kind of functionality. So if I don't want my attendees to see the attendee list, I can disable this. Again, with the public chat and the Q&A, I can also disable these live in my webinar. And the fourth one I want to just note really quickly is the view Q&A. So if you have Q&A enabled, but you don't want your attendees to see the questions being submitted, you only want yourself and any other guest presenters to see them, you can turn off the view Q&A so that only you and any other host will be able to see these questions. So again, the first four toggles here are auto-enabled, and then the bottom two here are auto-disabled. And I want to make it very, very clear that if you do enable these, it will allow all of your attendees at any point in time to be able to share a microphone or a webcam. Now, I do not recommend this for webinars. It's much more of a meeting tool. If you are planning to host meetings with BigMarker, it's a great way to get everyone on really quickly. But it's not so great for more lecture-style content when you're trying to host that traditional webinar. So if you do want to keep these off, but let's say you do want to allow certain attendees to be able to share a microphone or webcam, that still is possible. Again, you'll want to keep those two tabs or toggles off, and you'll want to find the attendees who are listed below here. You can find their name listed, just as my name is listed here in the admin section. And you can enable their microphone and or their webcam by clicking these icons next to their name. And that'll allow single attendees to be able to share without giving everyone access. Now that's all for the audience tab of the host control panel. The only other two sections to note are the recording tab. This is where you can start and stop your recording. Now you cannot pause your recording. I always like to note that you can only start it and stop it once, so that's just something to keep in mind. As well as the automation tab here. And the automation tab, if you have an automated webinar set up, will show you the timeline of events so that you can see, okay, my next chat message is going to send in 2 minutes and 32 seconds, my video will play in 13 minutes and 42 seconds, etc. So, you can keep track of your automated webinar if you do choose to be inside the room. But of course, if you're not planning to be inside your webinar during an automated webinar, you don't even need to join and check that out. It's just kind of more for the host to kind of follow along during the webinar. But that kind of concludes today's session. Again, to break it down into 3 more manageable chunks, what we've covered today is the channel, the webinar creation and setup process, as well as the hosting experience from both the hosts and the attendees' perspective. Thank you again for attending today's session. I really appreciate your time, and happy hosting. Thanks again.